it's not a big build. A lot did not happen in this build, but the one thing that did happen is one of the most important things that could have happened in my eyes, and that is allowing Blood DK to finally get into Torghast. So I was very excited about this when it came up last night. I have checked it out, tested it out quite a lot, and I have to say, it is a lot of fun to play a Blood Death Knight in Torghast, and I think that is going to be because Blood DK is going to be in a great position moving forward into Shadowlands here. So if you haven't followed the series up to this point, we talked about Blood DK a lot in the first and maybe second video as well. But this one is just going to be about Blood DK because we've learned a lot about him. We talked a lot about them, and we saw a lot on stream. Two of the things we saw was the Night Fae ability. We saw that entirely on Thursday's stream. Got like 4 hours of testing with that. And then today I was able to test the Necrolord Covenant ability, Abomination Limb. So this ability is very interesting. We've now seen all 4 abilities for Blood DK, so we're going to talk about that as well. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit about the overall situation with the class, because we've talked about this a couple times now, and you know, mostly it's happening with like other tanks like Prot Warrior and even Baron and other stuff like that. And I just can't help but feel like Blood DK is a step ahead of those tanks right now. Now, obviously, there's things like Soulbinds and Legendaries still to come. But it certainly does feel like Blood DK is going to be the king of really any small group content, especially. Any content like 5-mans or even Torghast, where you need as much self-reliance on yourself as possible, as much reliance on things like utility, stuns, interrupts, things like that. Blood DK really dominates because they have Death Grip, they have Gore Fiends. They also have this Abomination Limb, which can act in multiple ways utility-wise. But, you know, a lot of these things aren't great in raids. So it's like, you know, people actually, one of the viewers from the other day's stream said, oh, you know, Blood DK is overpowered. Just admit it. It's going to have to get nerfed. And it's like, yeah, you might be right. They are potentially overpowered. But I don't think people fully understand the degree of being overpowered and how that transcends the game, right? Because, like, look at it this way. In BFA, Prot Warrior is overpowered. Like, seriously, would you agree with that or not? If I said the words Protection Warrior is overpowered right now, they are the best tank, what would you say to that? Well, most people would be like, yeah, he's right, man. They're really crazy right now. But some people would be like, well, not in raids, not in maybe PvP or other content, right? So that's the thing about the game that you have to understand. It's just because DK looks like it's going to dominate 5-mans again, thanks to all these additions and new abilities and stuff that they're getting, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be overpowered. You know what I mean? It's just how the meta proliferates that people think, you know, the actual strength of the class is greater than it is. So that's something to consider. But let's go through quickly a couple things about Blood DK and why it might be considered overpowered right now. Okay. First things first. Anti-magic zone. This is a bigger deal than people think. Honestly, this is a much bigger deal than people think, because this is now. I mean, it's just this in Warrior, effectively, right? No other tank, at least, you know, maybe you can look at Paladin in some ways. No other tank really has access to something that is going to help the party or raid survive as well as themselves, right? Like, I could use this for my own benefit. Obviously, another 20% magic reduction on a 2-minute CD is very good regardless. But it's going to help everybody. And there's a lot of times in 5-mans and raids where a 20% magic reduction would be like the best healing CD in the game. It's like up there with Devo or right now, you know what I mean? So anyway, it's a very interesting, just having that alone is such a huge buff. But of course, they got a lot more than that. They also got Blood Tap, which, if you remember from the old days, has a huge impact on the pace of the rotation. So that is going to be a really big deal. We talked a lot about Blood Tap in the previous videos, but effectively, it's going to really open up the rotation, and it's going to synergize really well with Red Thirst, okay, which also has been buffed. I can't exactly remember. We covered this in a previous video, but like, these two things together are really powerful. Blood Tap means more death strikes, you know, more consumption of runic power, and means more Vamp Bloods over time, okay? Then you also have something like this, Voracious. Okay, getting DC'd. Voracious buffs are actually pretty sizable because the extra leech and, of course, extra death strike healing is going to really make this talent very interesting. But you also have things like Death Pack on the row, and, of course, Bloodworms, which is still going to be a very good talent, especially since it's the only one that really contributes offense as well. So it's kind of just the overall kit right now that looks so strong. Also got some other new talents and some iterations, but we've talked about those in the past. And I think the big thing here is just how well they're going to play in content like this because of those iterations. And of course, you know, other things like Lichborn coming up. If you haven't seen this, you get basically 10% leech for 10 seconds every 2 minutes. Also makes you immune to charm, fear, and sleep, so even more utility technically. Of course, Raised Dead as well, 2-minute CD, a ghoul that lasts for 1 minute, so that's an offensive buff. And then if you use Sacrificial Pact properly, which is relatively hard to use, you're going to need some weak Horus Attractus, of course, but basically just make it expire at the end of its duration to maximize your offense, or potentially in a big AoE situation. Like the kit has just expanded in such a way that it's hard to say like, wow, they haven't gained a number of things that just can't be nerfed, right? Like, okay, so what could they nerf? They could undo Voracious. They could undo Red Thirst. Maybe, I don't know if this talent's going to be that great, honestly, but I've been using it. It seems cool. They could get rid of that talent. It was basically just a Azerite trait. They can get rid of the Rune Forges. If you haven't seen the new Rune Forges, there's new Rune Forges as well. They could like undo some of these, although again, it's out to lunch on whether or not these are going to be better than like Fallen Crusader, etc. But they're so like dynamic, they're so different that it's like, oh, I can't wait to mix and match these. They could undo this. They could make this only for DPS DKs. I haven't mentioned this, but they have Rune Tap again, baseline, which was basically just the talent from BFA. So like, you know how strong that can be. It's like they could just get rid of all these things, and then they could be back to where they were. But like, I don't think they're going to get rid of 10 things. Yeah, and they can't nerf this. Like, what are they going to nerf this to? 15%? 10%? Like, okay, so 20% instead, maybe it's 10%. And then what, they're going to nerf, like, they make Vamp Blood worse or something. Like, they can't do those things. Like, the intangibilities of Blood DK are what makes them so powerful. So I just want that to be clear. Like, when people are talking about them being overpowered, it's not that they're overpowered. They were just underpowered in BFA. Like, that's... So they might get nerfed in Season 2 of Shadowlands, but, like, unless they're going to completely undo all the things they just did on this character, it's not going anywhere. You know what I mean? That's just... There's just that many intangible additions that are always going to be valuable. So I just want to show off this ability real quick because, you know, last week we got a little criticism because I wasn't able to show the abilities off. In case you're not sure how it works, basically the abilities, like they alternate every day. So I don't have, you know, the wherewithal to record it all. But yeah, basically this just lasts for a while, does a fair amount of damage, and pulls enemies in. The problem is, like, this is just very one-dimensional if you're in a raid. You know what I mean? Like, it's a terrible, terrible trait if you're in a raid. And as you see, I mean, it's a relatively long CD. It doesn't do that much. But the big thing about this trait, this Covenant in general, is the actual shield. So we talked about this in the last video. But if you haven't seen it, this is actually the bigger deal here. Fleshcraft. This is a much bigger deal. Forms, basically, it's a 2-minute CD giant absorb. So it's like stuff like that that makes me wonder, like, okay, Blood DK is going to be really overpowered with these things. And now, like, being able to go into combat with a giant shield on you, potentially up to 50% of your maximum health, I mean, that's a really big deal. It's going to be hard to use, surely, but it's certainly going to be better than the alternatives, right? And the way you use it is you channel it. We talked about this in the last video, but yeah, you just channel it and it puts a shield on you. And then, as you see, you know, a couple thousand shields. Actually, the number was not going down for some reason. But anyway, that's that. So I think, you know, in terms of covenants, let's take a look at the covenants real quick. Just because I think that this is still important. And, you know, maybe not everybody's aware. But yeah, let's have a look. I think that this covenant is going to be irreplaceable, though. So Kyrian, we've already looked at this in depth. That's the first build. Basically, it's just a big single target nuke, almost more offensive than defensive. And then, of course, Swarming Mist. This is actually the one that I'm favoring the most right now for 5-mans. It's basically like a reverse Bone Storm. Very powerful ability when you're surrounded by many targets. And it, of course, has great offense and defense properties, like really good. Necrolord, this one is basically just a utility spell. It does not really seem to help you at all for defense. Like, it doesn't help you really at all for defense unless you're interrupting mobs. But of course, the mobs are, once they're in range, they can't be gripped again. So that's pretty that. And then Night Fade. This one actually is really growing on me. We tested it a lot on the stream, so you should check that out from Thursday's stream. But yeah, long story short, it's like a massively buffed version of Death and Decay. It replaces D&D. It looks gorgeous, by the way, if you haven't seen it. But the main thing about it is it stacks up this like strength buff, like this percentage strength buff and like percentage damage reduction on the targets, and it seems to keep stacking. Like as long as I keep dropping it, it'll stay at the maximum amount of stacks, which is 15. So as of right now, like, this is not anything to take advice from, but like Necrolord, they're the only ones, just like from last video, they're the only one that actually has like a minor ability or whatever you want to call it, like the non-class specific ability. That's the only one in the game that actually helps you tank right now. Like the other ones are good, but this one like legitimately just is very good for tanks. But then Venthyr, they might have the best one for like 5-mans and like overall AoE content. But otherwise, I think Night Fae might be the play right now because it's like really good to have 15% more strength for 100% at the combat. I don't know if that's bugged. Like we talked about it on stream a lot. I don't know if that's actually supposed to be working that way. There's a good chance that it's not supposed to be working that way. Like it's meant to not stack, like it just goes away after D&D goes away. But the way it worked was basically every tick of damage from the D&D, it applied a stack. So 1% all the way up to 15%, 15 stacks of this. Basically like it did 15% less damage to me, I believe. And then it gave me 15% more strength. So it was like, okay, I mean, if I basically keep that up 100% of the time, it seems like. I don't know if that's going to be intended. But I quite like that ability because it replaces D&D. It actually looks amazing, by the way, and it does make the class feel way more rounded. Like, that's a lot of strength. So we'll see how it goes in terms of that. But overall, I just wanted to get this video out because I feel like there wasn't a lot to cover, but a lot of people watched the stream, and I think a lot of people were like, oh, Blood DK is like really overpowered. Or, they had different opinions of Blood DK. So I just wanted to give you my thoughts on it. And one other thing I wanted to say that is probably definitely not going into the live version of the game, but it's definitely overpowered. In Torghast, you could control undead, a mob, and you could sacrifice it. In fact, I'm going to show you that now. This is even more confusing than it might sound. So I just control undead that mob. You could control undead elites and sacrifice them. So that's definitely not going to happen. But I was able to control undead this mob, so I have a free pet. And now watch this. Okay, so now I have 2 pets. Okay, now 2 pets, better than 1 pet, of course. And then here you'll see, watch what happens here. We'll kill this mob, get enough runic power, and watch, I can actually sacrifice both of them. Now, I don't know if that's intended or not. It might be intended that you can have 2 pets and that you could sacrifice both of them, maybe for even more damage and healing. But also what might be not intended is that you just can't mind control some of these mobs. Like I'm able to mind control these like elites that are, the ones like this one here, watch. I can go mind control this mob. And then that's going to be it. But yeah, it's pretty overpowered, honestly. Like it was the reason I was able to get places in Torghast. So like I could take this mob, and the weird part about it is like I could buff it with unnatural power. If you don't know what this is, it's like the buff. Maybe it's not working now. Anyway, it's like the buff that when you're fighting an elite, it gets stronger over time. So it's like a rage timer kind of thing. But like it does a ton of damage. These mobs are like crushing, and I can just literally just sacrifice it. Can't show it because it's on CD, but anyway, that's that. So I just wanted to say that Blood DK and Torghast feels really fun. I really like. They don't have that slam dunk covenant ability like Bear and Brewmaster had, but they have some really cool ones. I haven't really been able to test them. Maybe we could see 1 or 2 right now. Let's see. Yeah, this one's cool. So it just reduces the CD of Dancing Rune Weapon. I mean, that's like a great talent. Pretty easy to do. The one that was really cool was that you get to summon you get to summon Darian Morgraine. It's like instead of Deathgate being like a Deathgate to your Order Hall or whatever, it actually works as like a buff. Like you summon a pet instead, which is really cool. So I would definitely recommend checking that out if you're interested in DK stuff. But I just wanted to kind of get my thoughts together on DK. Like I said, they're getting like 8 to maybe even 10 new abilities or new interactions that are all very powerful. So yes, it does seem like they're overpowered, and I could easily agree that they're going to be overpowered in Season 1 of Shadowlands, and they might be nerfed again in Season 2 of Shadowlands. But it doesn't really matter, because so much of the power that they have is intangible that unless they remove all of these things, they're still going to be fun, very iterative, very interactive, and very powerful in many types of content. So enjoy if you play a Blood DK. This is the expansion for it, right? It's been powerful in the past. maybe it doesn't, it doesn't end up getting as powerful, but it's just so, like, look at this, man. Come on, I got a freaking dude from Naxxramas mind control. Like, what else do you want?